Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. We have a very special guest on today's show, XinYi Lim, Senior Director of Corporate Development at Pinduoduo. She is responsible for Pinduoduo's international corporate strategy efforts. As most of you know, the growth story of Pinduoduo has been described as miraculous. It's the fastest growing e-commerce scale-up in China, cracking the renminbi 1 trillion, which is about 141 billion USD, in transactions milestone in less than half the time it took Alibaba and JD. That, alongside a few other numbers, tells the story of an irresistible force shaking up China's e-commerce landscape. If you took that story to the bank and picked up PDD shares at IPO, you'd be up 150% right now. Needless to say, this was all a story we were very excited to dig into. We talked to XinYi about interactive e-commerce and PDD's backstory and differentiating factors, and discuss observable trends in consumer behavior. We also talk about which of those shifting behavioral trends will be temporary or permanent and why. We also discuss Pinduoduo's long-term growth strategy in the coming months and into next year, and their plans for international expansion. Enjoy.
So one trend that we've tapped upon is actually, what we call C2M, or consumer to manufacturer. So China is the manufacturing hub of the world, right? There's a lot of manufacturing capacity in China, and there are a lot of these manufacturers who historically may have just been filling export orders. So these manufacturers at the same time are also trying to pivot more towards facing domestic demand, and they actually have a lot of that know-how accumulated over years and are able to produce goods that are of extremely good quality. It's just that they don't have that foreign brand label on them.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market no globally minded brand should ignore, but entering markets like China is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. Times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success expanding into the markets of the Middle Kingdom. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies enter the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful China entry and growth strategies by interviewing the people behind those success stories. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies.
XinYi, thanks for coming on the show today. Really appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
So why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I'm XinYi Lim. I'm the Senior Director of Corporate Development at Pinduoduo, which I joined in late October 2018. Prior to that, I was a technology analyst working for Singapore Sovereign Wealth Fund, GIC, in both Singapore as well as New York.
Why don't we start with telling us what is interactive e-commerce?
Yeah, interactive e-commerce is a relatively new term, right? So when people hear it, they don't really know what it entails. So I think it's probably easier to think about it in contrast to traditional or more conventional e-commerce that you and I might be more used to, which is, you often have something in mind that you want to buy. It's more efficiency oriented, right? And then you pull up, either Amazon or Taobao or whatever it may be, and you go, input something into the search bar, right? So it's more a targeted, solitary kind of shopping behavior that is also ultimately a bit more efficiency driven. So this is something that I think e-commerce in all its evolution over the past 2 decades has done pretty well, right, in terms of helping people who know what they want to buy find those things relatively quickly and efficiently. But when you think about our typical offline shopping behavior, it's not always like that, right? So there are times when you're in the shopping mall, you're just hanging out with your friends and family, and sometimes, as you walk around, as you look at things, right, there may be something that catches your eye, maybe catches your friend's eyes, and you have a conversation, right? Like, oh, do you think that would look good on me, right? Like, oh, what is that thing? Like, oh, it looks pretty fun, right? And like, oh, yeah, I got one of those things, and like, it's really nifty, you should try it. So there's actually a lot of that element that's missing in conventional e-commerce, right? Because you don't get the interaction, you don't get the feedback from friends or inputs from friends, right? Who may have considered a similar purchase decision, right? Or who may have actually a better sense of, oh yeah, I tried this, I tried that. Maybe this thing would work better for your needs because they know you probably much better than, say, an algorithm on an online shopping website would, right? So interactive e-commerce is trying to understand, human needs through the community that surrounds each and every one of us, right? So when we designed Pinduoduo, we created this team purchase model, right, whereby, if you buy together with a friend or somebody else in your social network, you could actually enjoy a lower price. So this naturally incentivizes people to share with each other. But at the same time, right, because these are your friends, these are your social contacts, you would also know probably, something is more suited to be sent to a particular person, right? And for instance, if you and I are both friends, I wouldn't be sending you a recommendation for lipstick, right? Unless maybe I know you're looking for a gift for your wife, right? So that could be one reason why. So this is kind of pretty central, I think, to the shopping experience on Pinduoduo, right? Whereby, as you browse, right, and it is driven around an interactive feed, right? It's a mobile first and mobile only platform, and it is driven around a feed very much like Facebook, right? So as you're browsing, as you're exploring, you can see, certain products or certain shops have been, given good reviews by your friends. We've also introduced new features whereby you could actually have a further curated community of friends whom you share even more information with, or you can actually get advice from them directly inside the app, right? You could send them a message and say like, has anybody, bought one of those two-seater prams? What is a good brand, right? Or, what's the lightest one that you've come across or whatever it is. And people can interact in real time and feed that information to each other and help each other find the right product in a more enjoyable as well as still efficient way.
Can you tell us a little bit about the backstory of how PDD, if you mind me calling it that, Pinduoduo, started, where it came from, and in the founders, how they got it off the ground, and then maybe talk to us a little bit more about how the platform works, if there's more to be said, size of the user base, size of the company, where you're based, stuff like that.
Sure. So Pinduoduo was founded in 2015, and our first incarnation was actually as Pinhaohuo. So we were a first-party platform that was focused on selling fruit and fresh produce. So our founders, they've worked together in a variety of prior startups. So although Pinduoduo today is only about 4 years old, our founding team, as well as the bench directly beneath them, they've actually worked together for over 10 plus years, right? So our founder, Colin Huang, he is an ex-Googler. So he was actually, one of the first waves of Googlers to come into China. So we worked together with Dr. Kai-Fu Lee. And Pinduoduo, when he founded the Pinduoduo's prior incarnation, Pinhaohuo, in 2015, it started with an observation that, even though, right, already in 2015, there were larger and more established e-commerce players, he felt that this was not going to be, the final state of e-commerce in China, and that there was something that was still lacking, right? So looking at the landscape in 2015, there were a few things that were different from, say, back in the early 2000s when the other players got started. So for one, WeChat had already become the prevalent mode of communication across the entire country. So whether you were somebody who's living in a lower tier city or somebody who's living in Beijing, right, everybody uses WeChat, right? So it's like the common denominator that everybody uses to communicate. Mm-hmm. And the internet penetration, right, the mobile penetration was also extremely high, right? Such that actually everybody all across the country could get online reliably and be on this common platform of WeChat. Now, at the same time, in 2014 and 2015, WeChat Pay and Alipay also had a very high-profile kind of red packet campaign, mm-hmm. where actually a lot of people in China who previously didn't really have a mobile wallet or didn't know what an e-wallet was suddenly became owners of e-wallets that had some money in it. Right. So it's like you suddenly had a massive population of people, all with some spare change to spend, but not quite sure where they could go to spend it, right? Because the network of merchants accepting these modes of payment was nowhere as widespread or as ubiquitous as it is today in China. Mm-hmm. Now, we were also observing that, for e-commerce, even though certain categories, like for instance, electronics, had a relatively high penetration rate, right? Today, nearly 1 in 3 TVs sold in China is bought online. But for agricultural produce, for fruit, that online penetration rate is extremely low. Right. This is also the case in the US, right, where grocery penetration is actually historically low prior to this pandemic outbreak. Yeah. So this was an area where they felt like, okay, even though people may think e-commerce is already kind of red ocean, actually for the fresh produce category, this is something where it's still relatively blue ocean, right? There's a lot of potential for growth. At the same time, the price of each product is relatively low. So, for people to take a chance and spend 20 RMB on buying some fruit on a platform they hadn't heard of is probably a bit of an easier sell, right, than trying to get that same person to spend 200 or 2,000 RMB buying electronics. At the same time, it's a perishable good in that, if you consume your apples, you get through it in a certain period of time, you do have to replenish. So this naturally builds in a very high repeat purchase frequency. So this was why they picked this segment to start out with. And then as we grew rapidly, we evolved from a first-party platform to also having a third-party offering selling other goods, because we figured, well, if I'm already dealing with, 200 million shoppers, right, which was where we had got to in 2017, then why don't I actually just ramp that up, right? Why don't I start to target actually, a wider array of goods that these same people could potentially want to buy the next time they come here to browse for their fruit. So in the span of just 4+ years, we've grown to become the second largest e-commerce platform in China with close to 600 million annual active buyers, right? So we had 585 million annual active buyers at the end of 2019, of which we had 482 million monthly active users. And we crossed the 1 trillion RMB GMV mark in the December quarter in 2019. So that's approximately 145 billion USD GMV over the last 12 months in 2019.
I mean, those are just staggering numbers, especially for a guy in Canada, for instance, to be able to wrap my head around just how much and how active that is. Is there any other way that you can describe how you're different from the other e-commerce platforms, either in acquisition or retention or any other form that you are differentiating yourselves?
Sure. So I think the fundamental differentiation that we start from, right, is an understanding that, people's needs can be very dynamic and it can be influenced by those around them. So when we first started, we actually hardly spent anything on sales and marketing, right? Because we understood that, well, for people, everybody has their own network of friends, right? No matter how big or small. And, you would have something in common with your friends and you would know what interests your friends most likely. And if you can both save money at the same time through a team purchase, you are actually incentivized to help us acquire users, right? So this was how we managed to kind of almost bootstrap ourselves with very little sales and marketing spend in the early days. Because for users who wanted to benefit from getting, say, apples at 20% off, they would be sending the links to their networks, right? And in the early days, before we got to the scale that we had, the team size that you needed to form a team purchase would have been larger, right? So it could have been 20 people, 10 people. Gradually, as we got bigger, the requirement for the team size also came down. So today, you just need 2 people to form that team purchase, right? But that whole element of sharing with friends, right, a good deal that you found, it also works because we understand that people's needs are actually fungible at times, in that, maybe today you say, okay, I want to buy some fruit for my family, but you don't necessarily have a very fixed or rigid idea of like, it has to be, $10 worth of apples, right? I'm only going to buy that. If I came by and I told you like, hey, hey Todd, for $10, you could actually get bananas at like a 20% discount today. And then that to you could be like, okay, it also fulfills your need for fruit and it's a good deal. So why not? So in that instance, we basically combined your demand and my demand, right? But it now goes to one merchant, right? Instead of the two of us having disparate, demands, and then that materializes in different times with different merchants, so that it gets dispersed, which is the conventional e-commerce model. When we actually have that aggregation together, the benefit to the merchant is, even though, he's still shipping out 2 packages of bananas, one to you and one to me, he actually gets a greater volume of orders in a much shorter span of time. And so this also translates to benefits for the merchant, for the upstream, right? So whether he's a manufacturer, right, he could actually better tweak his processing or manufacturing methods, right? Or if he is actually just a distributor, like say the fruit seller, but he actually has a better sense of like, wow, okay, this is my hit SKU, right? Maybe I should just be, procuring more of this SKU, right, getting it at an even better price, which I could then pass on to the consumers to drive an even greater volume. So those are things that I think we started out with a very fundamentally different view on from our peers, right? Because we realized that actually for people, right, you can influence the things that they want to buy, and you can do it at the same time such that they find it fun, right? They find it engaging. So our slogan is actually more savings, more fun. So that value for money angle is pretty central to our value proposition. And we always stress that, value for money doesn't necessarily mean something is cheap, right? Value for money is a relative concept. As long as you're getting something for what you perceive, right, relatively speaking, at a lower price than what you would expect to pay, then that's great value, right? So whether you're buying something that's expensive or has the same functionalities as a more expensive product, but you're paying a lower price, right? So in that situation, it's great value. So this is something that, is pretty central to our value proposition. And then a more fun element comes in terms of, how we design the interface. We have games also on our platform. So people come to our platform knowing that it's a place where they could just browse, right? You can just have fun. You can just relax. And so, even if you don't have a targeted specific thing that you want to buy, you might still be prompted to just open up the PDD app, right? And maybe you're playing a game, but in the course of playing a game on the platform, you might get a prompt, right, for more water droplets on Duoduo Orchard, right? Browse this page or make a purchase on this page. Yeah. And so it's seamlessly all woven in there. And obviously if we, do our jobs right in terms of really fine-tuning our algorithms to decipher, right, from people's behavior, what they're interested in. Each time I have an interaction with you, even if I'm just asking you like, hey, Todd, just browse this page, right? How you behave on that page, how long you linger on each listing, each different product that's shown to you in that page is also a data point to us. And that feeds into how we then present the next recommendation feed to you, right? And so ultimately that drives better conversion as well.
For sure. And obviously, given those massive numbers that you told us before, you must be collecting and observing a tremendous amount of data. What are you seeing from that data? What are the trends? What are, if you could talk to us a little bit about demographic trends, product trends, device trends, payment trends, what can you tell us about some of the trends that you're observing with all that data that you have on hand?
Sure. So one thing that we're seeing is that I think, for years, people just kind of had this narrative about the Chinese consumer being on a path for consumption upgrade, right? But I think what we're also seeing is the evolution, right, of that consumption behavior towards more rational consumption. So what that means is that, even as you may be thinking about, I want to pamper myself, I want to buy something that's good, at the same time, that consumer is also looking for value for money goods, right? How can I still achieve my goals, but do it in a savvy way, right, in terms of managing my finances? So one trend that we've tapped upon is actually, what we call C2M, or consumer to manufacturer. So China is the manufacturing hub of the world, right? There's a lot of manufacturing capacity in China, and there are a lot of these manufacturers who historically may have just been filling export orders. So these manufacturers at the same time are also trying to pivot more towards facing the domestic demand, and they actually have a lot of that know-how accumulated over years and are able to produce goods that are of extremely good quality. It's just that they don't have that foreign brand label on them. Right. So the Chinese consumer today is also getting much more savvy and aware, right, that there are these goods out there. And so on our platform, we've actually launched a new brand initiative where we work with over 100 such manufacturers in terms of developing their brand as well as developing the right product suited to the domestic Chinese consumer. So we are actually able to feed some of their insights, right, on our consumer preferences, right, on an anonymized, aggregated basis, that like, hey, if you're a manufacturer making robot vacuum cleaners, well, guess what, right? For most of the robot vacuum cleaner purchases that we see on our platform, right, a certain percentage of them, they tend to fall in this medium price range. So maybe these are sort of the more beginner users. They would prioritize something that has more basic functionality. And so then that manufacturer can tailor a better product that's suited to the consumer. Now, at the same time, when we look at the actual sales data, obviously we see that these white label goods are selling very well. And we also see that for the consumers on our platform, right, some people have a certain perception that, Pinduoduo only serves the lower tier cities, or Pinduoduo only serves like, middle-aged damas or ayis, right, all looking to buy, cheap goods. That's actually not true, right? 80% of our shoppers are under 35 years old. And in November last year, 45% of our GMV actually came from first and second tier cities, right? So in terms of our user base, it is actually, I would say, pretty representative of the typical shopper crowd, right, that people would have in mind when they look at the other platforms. It's a relatively youthful group of people. The distribution of the users mirrors the population distribution of China. And at the same time, what we're observing between these different groups of people is that, for the folks in the lower tier cities, what Pinduoduo offers is the ability to browse different categories of goods, or a wider selection of goods than what's available in their offline stores, right? So the lower tier city users are actually pretty adventurous when it comes to buying things that for them is an upgrade, right? So for instance, over the Lunar New Year period last year, we sold a lot of coffee makers to the folks in the lower tier cities. Now, conversely, actually, a lot of the people who are buying the fruit online on our platform, these are the people coming from the first and second tier cities, right? Because this is where they actually see a relative value, right? Versus going to the fruit stall in the first and second tier city, where those operators also do have to pay rent. Mm-hmm. And then when we look at sort of branded goods on our platform, right, certain things like, for instance, MAC lipsticks, Dyson hair dryers, these also sell very well. And I think it's a reflection of there are certain goods where there's clear, I guess, product innovation, right? Like with the Dyson hair dryer, people are willing to pay up for that. Mm-hmm. And then for certain goods where it's a relative upgrade for that consumer, right? Oh, I've never had a coffee maker. Like, I never even thought of buying a robot vacuum cleaner, mm-hmm. right? Having an array of goods that are also kind of at a more affordable price point actually widens the addressable market, right? Because now if, the price point for this good is lower than, say, what you traditionally associate it with, right? When you go to the shopping mall and you see if it's a certain foreign brand robot vacuum cleaner, it would be in the few thousands of RMB. But hey, on Pinduoduo, I can get one for under 300 RMB. That cost is not too much off versus, say, a handheld vacuum cleaner. So why not give it a try? So we're also seeing some TAM expansion, right, in those categories of goods, like, say, electric toothbrushes, robot vacuum cleaners, coffee makers, whereby the consumers who historically have not consumed these products are able to try consuming that for the first time, because there are these kind of more wallet-friendly options that are available to them. And then when we look at the younger users on our platform, they're also very trendy, they're very savvy. And so most recently for Mother's Day, it was somewhat surprising to me, at least, right, that of our top 10 bestsellers list, right, while there were sort of your more typical things like, for instance, skincare or lipstick, right, to buy for your mom, right? One of the things that also was trending was we had robot vacuum cleaners and we had massage guns, right? So for our young shoppers, right, clearly I think they are thinking about more, fancy, at the same time still value for money goods that they can buy for their mothers, right? Like something to take the load off of them, something to help them relax. And so these are things that we're seeing on our platform.
I wanted to ask maybe a question about how trends may have changed either temporarily or permanently due to COVID-19. Did you see any shifts that now that China has come out of it, any shifts in consumer tastes or preferences or purchasing habits that change that might be just simply temporary? Or have you seen any shifts in product verticals or anything that you think may have actually been kind of nudged off of where they were before the pandemic to a permanent new position?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that we started off as a platform selling agricultural produce, and till this day we actually do still sell quite a lot of agricultural goods. So in the full year of 2019, we sold about 136 billion RMB worth of agricultural goods. So that constituted about 13.5% of our total GMV.
Wow.
Now this actually, so I mean, we saw that actually with the COVID-19 disruption, agricultural goods continue to be a very strong performer on our platform, right? So our sense is that there are people who historically, maybe they knew that you could buy these things online, but they just weren't nudged, right? They weren't really pushed to do that until sort of COVID-19 happened. Everybody was locked down at home and you kind of were forced, right, to try all these things. And so one thing that we did, we also launched our live streaming offering on our platform. We launched it early part of this year, but it really ramped up I would say during the COVID-19 period as well, because in lieu of that physical interaction that you might have had in the offline store previously, right? Either with the fishmonger or the fruit seller, now, you're stuck at home, you have to do it remotely, right? So one way that people actually gain some confidence and build that trust is through live streaming, right? So the farmer can actually stream to you and show like, look, this is my orchard, right? This is how I grow my oranges. I'm just, plucking it off the tree right now. This is the size of the orange versus the size of my hand or whatever it is. So that helps to give people some comfort and encourage them to try that online shopping of agricultural goods. So I think sort of that shift towards more grocery, more agricultural goods purchasing online, I think that is something that was really accelerated by COVID-19. And then another trend that we've seen is also around, say, fitness products, right? So like yoga mats, weights.
Right.
People are basically also being a bit more cautious, right? And then they've also realized while, being quarantined at home that, you can actually do a lot of these home fitness things, right? So people have bought these types of like equipment. During the COVID-19 period, one of our best sellers was also, apart from the fitness equipment, was also egg beaters and sort of like these little kitchen appliances. Yeah, because and now people are realizing that like, hey, maybe it's safer for me to just make my own meals instead of ordering takeaway, right? Because you don't really know how that's been produced or how that's been handled en route to your home. So people have unlocked newfound cooking skills or lack thereof, right, with different kind of hacks. And so the sort of like small cooking appliances also had a lift during the COVID-19 period. Now I think after sort of the easing of the lockdown restrictions so far in China, I think there's a slow recovery in the restaurant sector, right? So it seems like a lot of people are still preferring to make their own meals, bringing those meals to the office to eat versus, ordering takeaway like they would have in the past. So we also saw a pickup in the sale of things like lunch boxes, right? Or this the sort of reusable single person cutlery sets.
XinYi, may I ask, from the PDD perspective, you help a lot of brands and a lot of vendors and a lot of merchants. You help them grow. How is PDD going to grow? What growth strategies, what tactics are you going to be employing in the near future to continue your meteoric growth? Because you are such a young company, but have grown so huge so fast.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think for us, it does come back to the users first, right? So that's very much the orientation of our company. We are always thinking about what do our users want, what do they need, and then, how fast can we go build it? So I think so far, while we're pleased with our success, I think there's still a lot of low-hanging fruit that we can literally do, right? Because for our 585 million users today, there may still be products that they want that are not available on our platform, right? So I think in the very near term, something that we'll continue to do is to also broaden our reach, right, to merchants, whether domestically or overseas. So for instance, in November last year, we had a tie-up with Amazon, right, around Black Friday sales. So we were able to bring in a lot of the products from Amazon.cn onto our platform, right, and make it available for our users. So our users were able to buy, skincare products from Germany. They were able to buy Calvin Klein clothing from the US through this partnership. And I think that's really an example where, we continue to think about how we can have kind of a maximum effect, right, and really improve the shopping experience of our users, but to do it in, more creative and innovative ways, right? Because for us, even though we're just a 4-year-old company, we still feel like we should be running faster, right? We still feel like there's a lot more that we can be doing, and I think when it comes to potentially other products or other kind of shopping experiences, I think we're still keeping a fairly open mind. We typically tend to be a bit more cautious on our investment strategy, right? So we recently made our first big investment, which was in Gourmet, right? So we basically have this partnership that we've begun with them, whereby they will help us design some products, right, that are suited to our domestic consumers. So back to that C2M point that I highlighted earlier, C2M is really a longer term trend that we see, continuing across multiple industry segments, right? And this is something that I think our peers have also recognized, right? So we don't think it's one of those situations where it's a winner takes all, because the opportunity is sufficiently large for everybody to jump in, right, and help these domestic manufacturers design better, more suitable goods for domestic consumers. So that's something that I think will continue for quite some time. And then at the same time, for Gourmet with the electronics, right? That's also a category where sometimes I think having the physical presence still makes a difference, right? And it's also handy to have that established kind of network of distributors or stores, as well as people who can provide the after sales service or any issues with installation. You know exactly where to turn to in your location. Right. So I think that is also further along the path of us trying to instill in the users the sense that, I can just go to PDD for whatever it is that I want to buy, right? Whether it's something as small as, an orange, or whether it's something as big or bulky as, say, an air conditioner, right? Or a fridge, etc. So I think that's a path that we'll continue down on, right? To build up that trust and between the users and our platform, as well as to, further enhance their user satisfaction.
I know you talked a little bit about some of the cross-border, some of the stuff outside China. How earnestly, at such a young age that PDD is, how earnestly would you be looking at gaining some markets outside of Canada, outside of China? What markets would you potentially be targeting first if you are already looking outside China?
Yeah, so I would say right now at the moment, we're not actively looking outside China. And I think it's stemming from, one, just respecting that, different markets have different kind of dynamics and consumer preferences, and what works in China doesn't necessarily always just translate wholesale to another market, right? So I think in China, we were very fortunate to sort of be at the right place at the right time, right? So I mentioned earlier, when we were started in 2015, the e-commerce ecosystem had already been in existence for quite some time and was relatively developed, right? In that a lot of investment had gone into building up logistics in the decade prior to our arrival on the market, right? A lot of consolidation had happened, a lot of improvements in the logistics sort of speed and quality of service had already taken place, such that, to persuade somebody who's not an e-commerce shopper or someone who's not an active e-commerce shopper to give it a try, well, at least you start off with the understanding or the expectation that, I can expect my packages to arrive in decent time and in decent shape, right? So why not, right? And at the same time, for the mobile wallet development, right, having WeChat Pay, having Alipay become extremely pervasive throughout the country, that was also something that helped, right? Because that meant that anybody could potentially be a customer of ours, right? And then having everybody on a common communication platform like WeChat would be something where, it's already pretty, I would say pretty established, right? We didn't have to go out and seed the market and say hey, everybody download this brand new app and then use that app to share things with your friends, right? There's already the app. It's called WeChat. And WeChat had a very open open position towards embracing third parties, right? Allowing third parties to actually share information, and at least it still happens on the WeChat platform, right? So that's something that I think is very helpful in the China situation. The only probable closest international peer that I can think of would be, say, WhatsApp. Right. And I think we have seen some interesting innovations, for instance, in India and in other countries around the world, where people have tried to leverage WhatsApp, right, for e-commerce. But I think for us, when we think about entering these other markets, we're always mindful of kind of, what are the preferences of the consumers there, right? Would consumers there perhaps be less willing to share with their friends in exchange for savings, or would consumers perhaps have a bit more concerns, right, around, say, who gets to see what they're sharing, etc. And so that may sort of hinder their path to adoption. And then that's just sort of on the consumer end, right? And then on the infrastructure end, what is the state of infrastructure development, both physical and digital, in those markets?
Well, I think that's good self-awareness, I think, for Pinduoduo to understand that the foundation that it was built on, the current state of existence on infrastructure and culture and purchasing and mobile penetration and depth and the culture of China in general around e-commerce is all playing such important factors that aren't currently, as you see it, transferable to other markets, given their cultures, their technologies, their patterns and behaviors, correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's great. And you know what? You have the luxury of being in the biggest market in the world already, so I don't think you have to worry about it for some time.
Yeah, I think we still see a lot of opportunity in China. And I think, every day we're uncovering new insights, right, about our consumers, the sort of things that they're interested in. And I think, ultimately what we envision ourselves to be is also a platform that learns and grows with the consumer, right? Because one thing we're aware of is that, the consumer today, right, maybe, she's a 25-year-old young working professional. Her priorities at this time may be very different from, say, 2 years down the line when she becomes a new mom, right? When she has a young child to take care of. And then her interest in different categories may have changed, right? Her willingness to spend on certain categories may have changed. So this is something that we still see a lot of potential, right? In terms of us building our ability to understand, to adapt, and even to some extent try and preempt, right? And show the consumer the right thing at the right time. And I think going out into the rest of the world, that's going to be another huge learning experiment, right? Whereby we also have to really plan for the long term, and make sure that, we really have all the prerequisites in place, and that we are able to really have a long-term commitment to be able to be successful in a new market.
XinYi Lim, Senior Director, Corporate Development at Pinduoduo. Thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you for all your insights. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for coming on the show.
Same here. Thanks for having me.
Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market? Exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking across the pond for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope that you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands just like yours enter China. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co. And be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 再见。